Welcome to the Insurance Solutions for Family Cyber Risk webinar. My name is Linda Jancik. I'm the Personal Lines Product Manager at AAIS and your host today. Part of AAIS's members' focus is partnering with subject matter experts to explore topics impacting the industry. Cyber is one of those issues, and the risk is real. AM Best estimates the number of smart objects will increase from 10 billion in 2015 to over 34 billion in 2020. These objects deliver many benefits, but also expose our customers to new risks and dangers. During today's webinar, we'll monitor the chat feature. If you have a question, you can certainly ask that via chat. We will answer at the Q&A at the end of the webinar, and if time doesn't allow, we'll include any additional Q&A when we send the slides and supporting materials early next week. We will also utilize the polling function today. When a true, false, or multiple choice polling question pops up on the screen, please click on the radio button that you elect, and the results will show in real time, so we encourage 100% participation. After the webinar, we will share the slides and other materials, including the contact information of all presenters, so you can ask additional questions or set up time for additional information. AAIS has partnered with experts at Berkley Re Solutions, leaders from Symantec and CyberScout, as well as Barton Mutual, an insurance company regarding family cyber risk, possible solutions, and next steps to consider. Here is an overview of the agenda today. Joe Gervais from Symantec, a company that provides cybersecurity software and services, will go over some of the sobering statistics and magnitude of the problem. Jeff Cron, VP from Berkley, will outline Berkley's impressive research and turnkey product developed in response to this issue. Next, we will hear from Eric Warbasse, CyberScout. CyberScout provides education, identity protection solutions, and recovery assistance. Next, we will hear from Brian King, President and CEO of Barton Mutual. Brian is an AAIS member who moved forward in January providing family cyber coverage. We're interested in how he did it and how it's been going. We will conclude with questions and next steps if you're interested in learning more. So let's check how this polling works. Please click on the radio button and answer the question to what best describes your company. As you answer, the results will be tabulated in real time. Great. Wonderful. So as you can see, the questions are, you already have coverage in place, you're actively looking to provide coverage, you're at the initial stage of investigating, or you have not looked into family cyber. So please click on one of the radio buttons that best describes. Okay, great. Now I would like to introduce Chris Ellis, Senior Vice President and CMO of Berkley, who will moderate the next section. Thank you, Chris.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We are super excited to be here today. I am Chris Ellis, Chief Marketing Officer of Berkley Re Solutions. We really look forward to the next 45 minutes or so. This group had quite a bit of fun actually putting this together. We've worked together for quite a bit and really enjoy kind of what we've been able to put together for you guys. You notice that we've got 6 different speakers. You know, sometimes you get on some of these and there's just one person, and that might be a little troublesome for some. So we've got 6, so you'll have fun. Everybody comes at it from a different angle, as Linda mentioned. So we're excited and really grateful for the participation from the panelists. So super quick on the next slide, just a real quick on who Berkley Re Solutions are. So we are a very focused reinsurer. We're part of the WR Berkley Group, and we specialize in custom turnkey solutions. Cyber happens to be our largest and most active. We do personal lines, of course, that's what we're talking about today. We also do commercial and farm. And we are very honored and delighted to be partnering with AAIS for our cyber solutions and also this session as well. Let me give you just a little bit of sense of what we're seeing in the personal line cyber market. We've noticed a tremendous uptick in product development efforts for the last 6 to 9 months in cyber. I would say, it probably began about 18 months ago. Folks were kicking tires, exploring coverages, trying to just understand it. And we know many of you on the phone today, and I think that's a pretty good indication of where many folks have been. Many told us at that time that looking at personal line cyber was on page 2 of their priorities. Now what we're hearing, again, the last 6 to 9 months or so, is that it's on page 1 for many of the companies, and it's near the top. Many companies across the country are trying to launch, and we all know this as soon as IT can allow it, but many are trying to get out to the market as quick as they can. So, 6, 9 months ago, it was, hey, we're going to probably look at a product 21, 22, something like that. Now we've got folks that are trying to get it launched as quick as they can. Some have already launched the product in the marketplace, and you're going to hear later from Brian King, the president and CEO of Barton. They've already done this. They were one of the earliest to the market, and Brian's going to share, what was important to them, what was important to their agents, their insureds. So we're really happy that Brian is joining us so you can get kind of the feedback from somebody that's done it. It's a great segue to the next slide, which is titled Go to Market. So what do we mean by that? And it's really important for everybody to kind of understand what we're talking about. We're talking about a turnkey reinsurance program. So Berkley Re, AAIS, and CyberScout help get you to market quickly. If you look at the left side, what we're talking about is a white labeled marketing product. So it would be an endorsement to your package, to your homeowner's policy. And it's on your paper. Quota share reinsurance is available, 50% to 100%. Full implementation, partnership, and resources. That's all about how we get you into the market quickly. Comes with rates, rules, forms, the filing assistance, of course. We'll talk a little bit more in a bit on claims training and claims handling. So we provide that as well through the partnership. And of course, a huge issue is the education for agents and insureds, getting everybody to really understand what this is, and making it a valuable competitive advantage for you. And it comes with a very methodical, well-designed process to allow you to kind of craft your own program and get to that market as quickly as you possibly can. So let's dive right in. We are delighted to have Joe Gervais from Symantec joining us today. You probably know their brands Norton and LifeLock. Joe is Technical Director, Red Team Operations. And what Joe's going to do is he's going to give us a really great base, excellent framework on the threats and exposures we all face as consumers. And we're all personal lines customers, right? So we're really looking forward to Joe walking us through some of this. So Joe, take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being here this afternoon. I want to kick off a little bit about myself. I started breaking into computers in the early 80s, not because I'm some sort of super elite kid. It's just what I happened to be doing back in the day, and I'm a giant nerd. What I bring to the table today is that evolution over 30, 35 years of watching how the threats have changed. And threats that are happening right now today, real world threats, even 10 years ago would have been considered TV hype. The reality, unfortunately, has accelerated very quickly. As background, I do awareness training, security training regularly. And one of the things I try to drive home is just how simple it has become. Back in the early days, in the 80s, you had to be able to write assembly language on a computer and hand program a phone through your computer. These days, yesterday, in less than 30 seconds, I showed a group of people how we could have compromised any number of accounts just by doing a Google search online. There was no dark web. There was no filter. Any of your schools that your kids go to, they can Google. They can find this information. Where does this bring us to? Next slide, please. Billions of breached usernames and passwords are freely available and circulating. I can't underscore this enough. This information is everywhere, and it makes a very simple attack path for an unsophisticated bad guy, whether it's a harasser, a criminal, a cyber bully, to target somebody very directly. Again, these aren't hiding out on the dark web anywhere. This is freely available on the internet if you know where to look, and Google will help you get there. What happens with these billions of breached usernames and passwords? These aren't protected passwords. This is your actual password, and billions of others you can just read. Well, as of between May and December of 2018, there were 28 billion credential attacks attempted, reusing these credentials. It's called credential stuffing attack. I don't know if you have an account at Bank of America, but I know I've got your username and password. So I'm going to try to all the top 20 large banks. I'm going to try all the top 20 social media sites. Just to give you an idea of the volume, that level of attack, that was 115 million attempts each day to reuse those passwords that are freely available online. Next slide, please. Internet of Things is quite a buzzword. It's just the fancy devices we bring into our homes that are talking to the internet. 15 years ago, it was a joke that your toaster would be on the internet. Now our toasters are on the internet. Smart devices are on the internet. All these things, our televisions, our thermostats, our security devices, are accessible through the internet increasingly. Here's a scenario that actually happened a few months ago. It was not a hoax. Somebody targeted a family. They had accessed their passwords somehow, probably through those breaches we just referenced, billions of freely available passwords. They remotely accessed the security device that was installed in the family's home and proceeded to deliver a fake announcement over the speakers of the security system of an impending nuclear attack from a foreign country. It made the media. To be clear, the security device was not hacked. The attacker simply reused the password. Now, I think we move to the next slide, please. If you can imagine how this can start feeding in to cyberbullying, ransomware, phishing attacks, add in micro-targeting, your micro-targeted ads. If you're surfing the web, if you're having a conversation about a certain model of truck, these ads are starting to pop up in your feed. Increasingly, attackers and security researchers are starting to use micro-targeted advertising as potential vectors for delivering attacks, social engineering attacks and phishing attacks. It hasn't accelerated yet. My assessment is that it will be accelerating in the years ahead. The phishing attacks are getting so good, honestly, it's unfair to expect the average user to be able to detect them. And I could give you some examples if we had more time. I will ask you to trust me on this. The average user, they are outgunned right now. Is that pop-up for a flash update, is it a targeted phishing attack? Or is it an actual update that you need to run? The user doesn't know. Next slide, please. Which gets us to the key takeaway. The cyber attack options, they're increasing in number and availability. The level of sophistication required to execute these attacks is plummeting. Again, if I can teach a random room full of people in 30 seconds how to find passwords to compromise accounts, for educational purposes only, we weren't doing anything bad. Imagine a cyberbully getting a hold of that information. Imagine a cyberbully taking over the social media account of a vulnerable person and what they could do with that. Unfortunately, it's likely to continue to happen, and we'll go into a next phase of targeting for harassers, bullying, ransomware, and phishing. That's the lay of the land right now, and it's very realistic. This isn't gloom and doom any more than the reality is a little bit grim. And with that, I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Joe. Really do appreciate that. And I think it's, you know, we're gonna turn this and pivot over to Jeff Cron, VP of Berkley Re Solutions, who's going to actually start diving into the coverages, right? So we've done a lot of research and a lot of time in the product development. And I think what Joe's referencing, it just continues to evolve. It continues to become new threats, new exposures for us on the phone that have children and see how connected they are to the internet, see how connected we are with the Internet of Things. You know, we kind of look at the family cyber product right now as a version 2.0, version 3.0. It's going to continue to evolve because the threats are going to keep coming at us. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to kind of go through the core of the product. You'll note that we're going to look at 7 different core coverages as we roll these out. It's very bespoke, so it's you can create whatever kind of combination you like. But Jeff will take us through that. Jeff?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Joe, for the introduction of some of those stats. That was great. As Chris mentioned, you know, this really is an evolution here, and family cyber was born out of that evolving nature of this cyber risk we're discussing. These bad actors, as Joe mentioned, are getting smarter, and they're realizing, you know, their methods are not just limited to the commercial space, and it's really become an individual or personalized problem as well. And what that's done is it's created a very large coverage gap for your homeowner's policy. Traditionally, that homeowner's market has been so focused on identity theft, and as you've heard so far today, and you'll continue to hear, that really isn't enough any longer. So we like to think of this family cyber offering as kind of version 2.0, which, and by that we're talking about it's a comprehensive combination of both coverage with indemnification and services for the homeowner. And both of those things, the services and the indemnification, we'll touch on in the next few slides. So as we go to the next slide here, and the next few slides, actually, what we're going to do is touch on a few different stats and just further kind of drill into the need and the cause for creation of a product like this. So on this first slide here, what you see is some numbers across the top, just highlighting, you know, how prevalent cyber attacks are. And I think we understand that, and the numbers are scary and they are growing. So we don't need to belabor that. But one thing I want to point out is this United Nations study, which indicates 17% of the population is affected by cybercrime, whereas only 5% of the population is affected by that traditional robbery, burglary type of crime. And when we talk about that, like, we like to think about it in the simplest terms, right? So I always use the example of being in an airport where we so readily connect to the public Wi-Fi, we don't think twice about it. And in doing so, you know, you've got your phone on there, your tablet on there, whatever it may be, which also houses your Uber account or your Amazon account, which all are connected to your credit card. But again, public Wi-Fi, no one thinks twice. Whereas you would tell me I'm crazy if you heard me read my credit card number out loud over the phone in the same airport. But the realities are, you'd have to be sitting next to the bad actor in the airport who's writing down your credit card number as that goes. Whereas you can be 3,000 miles away and tapped into that public Wi-Fi network and doing all of that damage that Joe indicated is so easily found on Google. So just a couple of things to put that in perspective of the boundaryless world that cybercrime really is. On the next slide, you know, we talked about this a little bit with the Internet of Things and connected devices, you know, first being the increase of connected devices and also the lack of security that exists within them. And, you know, that's not to say we should all be scared of our smart toaster and smart refrigerator, but the reality is you do need to be aware of what comes with that. These were devices that were not built with security in mind. They were built with convenience. They're not sitting behind your firewalls and your security protocols. So while they are excellent and great to have, it's important for every user to be educated on what they are and the protections that need to be in place. And as Joe indicated, there have been a lot of recent news articles involving different devices, thermostats, TVs, you know, other items like that have just highlighted the exposure within these devices. Next slide, please. So just bringing this back into perspective with a few dollars to kind of highlight the real risk or the financial risk that comes along with some of this stuff. And as we work around this slide a little bit, starting at the top, you see that the average extortion attempt is over $1,000. That's important to note because this data is coming directly from the FBI and it's addressing personal extortion. You know, I think to a certain extent when we think of online extortion, we think of Bitcoins and hospital systems, but the reality is $1,000 is meaningful for most homeowners. And when they're facing a ransom attempt that is going to potentially destroy their network or delete all their personal files or release them on the internet, this is real money that they may need to pay and would be seeking indemnification for. As we keep going through this list here, you see $1.4 billion of victim losses in 2017. That's about $5,000 per internet crime event. Again, very real numbers. And that 1.4 in 2017 is kind of tip of the iceberg. Whereas if you add that in with the past few years, you're looking at $5.5 billion in internet crime losses over the last 4 years. And lastly, I think one thing to really point out here is that it can happen to anyone. You know, there's certainly no age discrimination in the world of internet crime. And you can see that, you know, just how the counts are spread very even from the what is thought to be tech-savvy millennial to those over 60 years old, all really being hit with the same frequency of these internet claims because no one is necessarily safe. So just some things to think about as you're kind of processing these cyber risks and how it is applicable to a broad spectrum of your portfolio. Next slide. So what I'd like to do here is talk about the covers we've put together, a high-level overview anyway, the coverages that make up our family cyber offering. And as Chris mentioned, there are 7 individualized components of this offering. And we'll touch on them individually, of course, and some important pieces about each coverage and potential exclusions that come along. Starting at the top here with extortion threat, it's really what it sounds like. It's the indemnification of the expenses and ransom that was paid to prevent or mitigate the extortion attempt. And there's 3 parts to that. We're talking about the threat to cause a network disruption and payment to prevent it from happening, the demand to restore an already disrupted network, and lastly, the threat to steal or release your protected information and the payment to prevent that from happening. Number 2 on the list, social engineering. This is the intentional deception of an insured by a fraudster, which led to the willing transfer of money. And that's really the key point there. Traditionally, you know, when you think of insurance, if the insured has participated even unknowingly, there isn't going to be coverage. But in this instance, where there is kind of deception and fraud, we are seeking to provide indemnification for those losses. And what we're talking about there are things like fake IRS scams where you believe you owe back taxes, the traditional kind of grandparent scheme where you believe someone is in prison and you wire money. The policy extends as well to offline scams, things like general contractor, subcontractor issues. And lastly, confidence and romance schemes, which I would like to highlight for one quick second because it's the one that everyone says, well, that would never happen to me, but it's actually grown. Losses are up 4 times from 2015 to 2018, with confidence and romance schemes in 2018 totaling $143 million. So again, these are very real instances of fraud and deceit that are out there. And as we mentioned, you know, in full transparency of the offering, there are things that we cannot cover within the realm of social engineering, things like business dealings, bad investments, or the very traditional advanced fee program, which most of you may know as the Kenyan Prince, who has so kindly emailed all of us asking for money at some point in time. Number 3 on the list, cyberbullying response coverage. First and foremost, with cyberbullying, we'd like to point out this is a first-party only coverage. We are looking to help and provide services to the victim of cyberbullying, not to the bully themselves. And what the coverage does provide is expenses for things like private tutoring, temporary relocation, psychiatric services, and tuition expense. And what we're talking about when we say tuition expenses, application fees, and the actual increased cost of tuition. if that means going from a public school to a private school or a private school to a more expensive private school, we are there to provide and kind of offset those unplanned for budget expenses that you now have to deal with because of a cyberbullying event. Number 4 on the list, identity theft. This is the traditional identity theft coverage that's really in the market, where we're talking about indirect costs, and really the benefit is the relationship with a service provider to help you reclaim and restore your identity. Number 5, system compromise. This is a data recovery and system restoration coverage. In simplest terms, I like to think of this as it's the fees to fix your network, fees to fix your computer. If you are suffering from some sort of malware or some sort of unauthorized access to your system, this is the ability for the insured to get back up and running and reclaim their files. We're going to touch on later in this presentation some of the services that come with our coverages. But one thing I would like to point out, because we have a great education service, a great direct service, but system compromise was designed to be as customer-centric as possible. And the thought process there was, let's let the insured have as much flexibility and as much choice as possible. We talked about a lot of things with vendors and different things, but by handcuffing the insured to something, we felt 2 ways about it. Is that you have the option to call a helpline and potentially be on the phone for an hour and a half and follow along and do what they want you to do, which frankly, I am not willing to spend an hour and a half on the phone. Or you have the ability of someone who may be willing to spend that time on the phone and they're just not able to follow along. So what we wanted to do is give the insured as much flexibility as possible, where they can seek out their local IT repairman, seek out their own, Geek Squad, whatever it may be, and kind of set it and forget it, drop it off and be reimbursed. Number 6 on the list is internet cleanup. These are the expenses associated with removing factually untrue written statements about you on the internet. What does that mean? It means you have the ability to seek out legal resources to best handle something that is factually untrue about you on the internet. Again, in full transparency, there is a social media exclusion, which is really born out of the fact that we can't do much about Facebook. We can't do much about Twitter. But if there is a blog, a local news network, your online news source, whatever it may be, it's protection and legal resources for ways to best handle something along those lines. And lastly, number 7, which is breach costs. These are the expenses associated with the notification, investigation, and monitoring in the event of a breach. And while that sounds very commercial orientated, oddly, about 50% of our states either have affirmative language or vague language that requires an insured to notify any person whose protected information was in their control and subsequently made available in a breach. And in this process, with this coverage, you have access again to our service provider and CyberScout, who will walk you through that process, handle the investigation, and handle the notification of those potential exposures. So I know that was fast, and please, of course, after this presentation or at any point in time, if you have questions, send them into the chat or follow up with us afterwards. One key thing here with claim handling is what we like to say is Berkley Re, we are here to provide any sort of additional training in the event that you or your company is going to handle the claims on your own. We provide training, resources, and of course, secondary review of any claim, as well as through our partnership with CyberScout, there is the TPA option where they can single-handedly handle the claims in a one-stop shop, service and claims TPA. But again, that is individualized choice and totally up to you. On the next slide here, just again, as we hand it over to Eric Warbasse at CyberScout, who will touch on the service offering. But Eric is the head of business development at CyberScout and has put together a really comprehensive education and service solution for this family cyber product. So that being said, I will turn it over to Eric.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be on this panel today, and I'd like to thank all of the attendees for taking time out of your busy day to explore this topic with us. So Jeff highlighted the broad set of coverages that Berkley Re offers, and I'll just take a few minutes to discuss our perspective really as the service provider on the opportunity that you all have to leverage Berkley Re's family cyber offer as a very effective tool for engaging policyholders and agents. Jeff pointed out that the legacy approach to offering cyber protection to policyholders has really been focused on offering identity remediation alone. But actual cyber risk is so pervasive and it's so much broader a category of risk than simple identity theft. And policyholders are constantly thinking about that risk, whether or not they realize it. So all the life events on this slide, whether they're using social media or opening a new line of credit, conducting a wire transfer, they've had a computer stolen, and many, many more, really compel your policyholders and your agents to think about this category of risk without necessarily putting a name to it. And because of that, it means they're fully prepared to be engaged and informed on the topic, and they need that kind of support. And the best part is when you engage them on this topic, you win twice, because you remind them of the affordable yet comprehensive set of coverages that you offer in partnership with Berkley Re, and you remind them more broadly of the value that you bring to them as their provider. So you have their attention, but now what? Our role at CyberScout in partnership with Berkley Re is to enable really 3 distinct capabilities that are all designed to put you in the best position to engage your policyholders before, during, and after they've been compromised in some way. Capability number 1 is education and awareness. A lot of times in our conversation with insurance carriers, a question arises with respect to personal lines policyholders as to what's actually meant by cyber risk specific to personal lines. Where does that risk begin and end, and how's it defined? And it's a really important question, because the answer to that question informs the next question, which is how do you then defend against it proactively? So we at CyberScout define cyber risk to consumers as simply old risks enabled in new ways as a result of the internet. Extortion, for example, is an age-old risk, but it's enabled now in a new way that puts what would have been historically very low populations or low-risk populations, like working and middle class, at a much heightened risk and at scale through ransomware attacks. The same can be said of cyberbullying, identity theft for sure, impersonation for fraud, data loss of third-party information, etc. It's all of those crimes are enabled in new ways as a result of the internet. So when you partner with CyberScout and Berkley Re, your policyholders have access to educational content that you can refer them to throughout the term of their policy. It's a searchable knowledge center organized to provide information on how to mitigate their risk, and then also have access to a self-assessment tool that produces a customized report specific to their risk of identity theft. So every time there's a new national headline related to cyber risk, cyberbullying is in the news, or a new ransomware attack has been widely distributed, for example, you have both a reason to reach out to your policyholders or your agents, and you have a resource that they can refer to that offers relevant and timely information about how to minimize their cyber risk. Pictured above on the left is a screenshot of the landing page for what we refer to as the Cyber Knowledge Center, and on the right is a screenshot of a risk calculator that produces a detailed report of an individual's risk of becoming a victim of identity theft, and provides tips for reducing that risk that are specific to that individual based on key risk factors. The second capability that we bring to market, set of services for you and your policyholders, is access to a full high-touch ID theft, ransomware, and home breach response counseling and remediation services. If you could go back one slide, please. The counseling aspect of the services is that a policyholder can contact our center call center 24/7 with questions regarding risk or potential risk of ID theft, and then steps to take to mitigate that risk. And we call this service life stages because the risk of ID theft is always increased when something substantive changes in our life. Moving, deploying with the military, sending a parent into assisted living, marriage, divorce, and child to college. These are all examples of changes that can lead to heightened risk. And our remediation team is equipped with an average of over 9 years experience to help answer questions about steps that can be taken to mitigate the risk for your policyholders before ID theft occurs. The ID remediation, ransomware, and home breach response services provide, of course, ID remediation in the event of an eligible policyholder has been a victim of ID theft. And that service is very high touch, meaning our remediation personnel do as much heavy lifting as allowed by the law and the policyholder, literally. We assign a dedicated agent to the remediation who works the case through to completion from beginning to end. And we do this with two goals in mind: reducing or eliminating the need for a claim, and really more importantly, ensuring the policyholder has a great experience at a time that's otherwise frustrating and even a little scary in some cases. Additionally, if a policyholder compromises somebody else's information, for example, if they are a treasurer for a club and they have contact and credit card information for members of the club that is breached, CyberScout will make our commercial data breach assessment services available at no charge, giving the policyholder access to our team of data breach response agents who can evaluate the compromise and propose the appropriate course of action with respect to a response. Then finally, in the event of a ransomware attack, our consulting services will be made available to the policyholder to determine the type of attack, backup options or workarounds, and potential next steps for the policyholder. Next slide, please. So the third capability that we enable is claims management. Jeff spoke a little bit to this. I'll just speak a little bit more. We enable that via our CyberScout Claims department. CyberScout Claims is the industry's first TPA focused exclusively on managing cyber and privacy breach claims, which means really better outcomes and experiences for you and your policyholders. They're designed with three goals in mind. The first is to keep our carrier partners apprised of the claim status by providing secure and complete transparency into their cases. The second is to improve customer satisfaction by directly connecting policyholders with cyber claims experts. And the third is to deliver higher operating efficiencies to our carrier partners and Berkley Re. And so the result is just a superior policyholder experience. So I hope that helps describe the services and value that CyberScout offers in close partnership with Berkley Re. Thank you.
Eric, thank you very much. I think for many that are on the line that have got some experience working with CyberScout, I think you'll recognize that it's a very high touch. And as you know, so that's kind of in the identity theft world. And now that we go to version 2.0, where we've got cyberbullying and we've got all the other coverages, social engineering, CyberScout has grown with that. And so lots of additional services and tools and tactics and things that come along with it. So pretty high level at this point, but certainly a hugely important piece that folks spend a lot of time with in training and education with the agents and insured. So appreciate that, Eric. We are now going to turn it over to Brian King, President and CEO of Barton Mutual. As we mentioned earlier, Brian has done this already. So Brian and his team began the journey, and he's going to walk us through what was important to them, what were the key things they looked for, why did they do this, and maybe some insights on how things have been going so far. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend Brian King.
Thank you, Chris. First of all, let me just thank everyone at AAIS, Berkley Re, CyberScout, and Symantec for allowing us to be a part of this webinar today. Just give you a little bit of a background as to where we come from or what we thought about when we made the decision to start offering the cyber coverage. Part of our strategic planning was looking at coverages we offer now, as well as types of coverages that we feel will be important to the next generation. As part of that, we started looking at some of the trends in the industry. And one of the things that for us, we noticed as a management team was that things like data breaches are in the news all the time. And I think we even become numb to them, and they really don't impact us the way maybe they did when we first started hearing about them. And as we discussed what we wanted to do moving forward and planned for that, one of the things that we wanted to do was differentiate ourselves between our competitors, as well as look at what type of competitive advantage we might be able to obtain. And there are different ways that you can go about differentiating yourself as well as getting an advantage. You can do it on price if you want. We didn't feel that that was something we wanted to get caught up in. So we started looking at ways to differentiate ourselves from a coverage standpoint or getting an advantage from a coverage standpoint. And in so doing, one of the things we started exploring was cyber coverage. And I reached out to Chris Ellis at that point, had a relationship with Chris for many years, and I just want to thank him again for everything he's done for us. Certainly helped us far beyond what we could have done on our own. once we started the process of discussing cyber coverage and the program, I couldn't believe how easy it was to implement. Most of that effort was done by Kathy Patton, Jeff Cron, and Chris, and they certainly made it simple for us. We didn't have to be experts in cyber coverage. They offered a lot of training for us as far as our underwriting team and our claims team went, so they could understand the coverage, understand how it could be viewed, or questions that would be asked from agency standpoint, as well as some things that you could run into on a claim. And then we also had training from CyberScout on how the claims piece would be handled. One of the other things that was appealing to us is that we did not have to worry about the forms piece. We didn't have to worry about developing our own rates. Those were all provided by Berkley Re. Certainly made that piece simple as well. And then the claim service provided by CyberScout, as Eric was discussing earlier, we implemented that third-party piece with them as well, so we did not have to go through a lot of training with our claim staff to bring them up to speed on it. We can simply hand it off to what I believe is the leading company in that space, handling claims for cyber and identity theft at this point. We also had efforts to educate our agency force, and we did that through webinars. Berkley Re and CyberScout offered those, worked very well. And then also educational efforts for our policyholders. We had marketing information provided to us by Berkley Re that is branded with our logo that we were able to send to our insureds, as well as put information on our website. Overall, I can say it's been a very positive experience, a lot of good feedback from our agency force in terms of offering this coverage. They all felt that it was something that they could find value in and explain that to their clients as well. So once again, I want to just thank everyone at AAIS, Berkley Re, CyberScout, and Symantec for their efforts. Thank you.
So first, a big thank you to today's presenters from Berkley Re, Symantec, CyberScout, and Brian, from Barton Mutual, what you've said really gives meaning because you've actually done it. Also, a big thank you to those who attended today to help explore this evolving risk. Now, we did receive some questions from the audience via chat, so we will go through a few of those. So we will open this up to the people that would be best able to answer. So one of the questions was, and I think Brian went into a little bit about this, but it's how can companies best educate and support agents and policyholders on this coverage? So Berkley, do you want to, Brian talked a little bit, but Berkley, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think Brian really hit it straight on. I mean, I think the way that there's been success is really sitting down, figuring out exactly the distribution, what's important, how do they typically communicate with them, and we just develop a plan, right? We sit down and we look at it from email campaigns, or whether it's marketing collateral, looking at policy stuffers. I think some of the successes that we've seen that's worked well is some carriers getting some agents together. So whether they've got an agency council or they have a small group of VIP agents or what have you, they sit down pretty early on in the process and share with them what they're doing, and the marketing comes up big time in cyber because, there's a lot going on in it. And so I think it's critical to get the agents involved early on. And I think like Brian and his team did is they asked for feedback pretty quickly. Here's what we're thinking of doing. Does that hit the mark? Maybe we tweak it. Maybe we change it a little bit. But there is no question that between CyberScout, Berkley, and the partner carrier, we sit down and we come up with a specific plan for that company. There's a lot of themes that cross all the carriers, but everybody's got a little bit of a different angle. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if Brian wanted to add anything.
And what I was going to add, Chris, was the great thing about working with a company like Berkley, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't have to be experts on cyber. You guys have implemented the coverage. You knew all of the ins and outs and were able to bring your experience to the table for us. And as you mentioned, some things are the same across lines for carriers, as well as some things will be unique to a carrier. So our experience working with Berkley Re and everyone there was very good. They were able to customize what needed to be customized to fit our company.
Well, next we have another question, and this is, how would a typical claim be handled between my company and CyberScout? So CyberScout?
Well, yeah, you bet. Happy to. So as Brian alluded, it's a pretty straightforward process. The policyholder will contact the carrier for coverage confirmation, and then the carrier takes the first notice of loss and emails it form to CyberScout. The policyholder is then engaged by CyberScout Claims, who coordinates with our consulting or forensics or breach or fraud teams as needed. And then we document all the activity in virtual claims adjuster platform and present a crisis management plan to the carrier's claims department. Once we have agreement on coverage determination and remediation strategy, the CyberScout team then executes the plan, and then finally we'll forward all invoices to the carrier for payment out of their claim system.
Here's a really good one. Can a company offer or a customer purchase less than the 7 coverage part? Jeff?
Yeah, so absolutely. Everything is individualized in a modular approach with the coverage, and the design there was to allow the policy to be as customizable to your book of business as possible. So best way to think about that is, we're aware that most companies are already offering an identity theft program. It's probably been running very profitably for the last 5-10 years, and that's okay if you want to leave it as is. We can remove identity theft from our offering. Similarly, we've had folks say that they've got a specific AARP portfolio, for example, and they may not feel cyberbullying is applicable there. Again, that is totally okay. We're here to be as flexible with our approach and as customizable to meet the needs of your portfolio. So it is certainly not a 7, take all 7 or take nothing. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 coverages, whatever really best fits your appetite.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and add a little bit of something too. So we've got some carrier partners we'll work with that'll have a high net worth segment of their business. And in some cases, they're actually looking at the high net worth business differently than they are perhaps their standard market. And that's obviously something easily to do, right? So do this coverage, this approach for high net worth, and do maybe something a little bit different, maybe something a little more price sensitive for that. And then to that point as well, right? So we've got limits that go anywhere as low as 15,000 to quite a bit higher. I think what we see in the marketplace is typically 25,000. I think some folks are looking at $50,000 limits. But when you look at deductible and you look at limit and you look at these coverages, it quickly, when you visualize kind of how we put the pricing together, you can really kind of target into what you're trying to do. So we've had some companies that said, hey, this is the price point we're trying to hit. We know what the elasticity is within our homeowners programs, and so we need to try to hit that, right? So then they look at those as individual 7 coverages. We've got price points for each one of those individually. They roll up into, take the total of the 7 and you get one price. But you've got a lot of flexibility. We've also had some companies that have come to us and said, we really just want you to just give us like one program, right? So all 7 is that, but then when there are needs and opportunities to do something different, it does have a ton of flexibility.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So it looks like there's actually a question for AAIS, and that is, what kind of support does AAIS provide for family cyber risks? And so I'll take that one. And so again, we have partnered with Berkley Re. We're learning a lot, but AAIS, and in addition to supporting webinars like this, we are certainly full service that we can assist with the filing of the forms and any other marketing materials and onboarding support that's needed. So hopefully you will leave this session knowing that everyone that's presented today is very, very willing to help and give you any kind of support that you might be looking for. So the other point is regarding the next steps. The next steps for those of us that are presenting today is that, again, it's not too late. If you have any additional questions, you can certainly use the chat feature. And those that we didn't get to, we will do responses. And when we share the slides and materials, those will be included. And on the next slide, this is the next steps really for you. Hopefully you've heard some information today that will give you kind of a chance to think and digest. And it does stick in my mind that Berkley is a very common coverage for a homeowner policy, and yet burglary, based on the United Nations data, affects 5% of the population, whereas cyber affects 17%. That really is stuck in my mind as something to think about. So next steps for you would really be considering what you've heard today. Any of the presenters would be happy. Their contact information is up here, as well as when we send the materials, reach out to anyone that presented today to either additional questions, or if you want to arrange a meeting to find out some additional information. Everyone is very, very willing and happy to do so. Future webinars will be announced soon. One of the things that we talked about is there are plans for commercial and farm cyber. So again, to be part of that, make sure that you watch, and you will certainly be invited to future ones. And on that note, we'd like to thank you for your time today.
Thank you, everybody.